Honoring parents. Adult children are to honor and care for their parents.
And notice how David did this. In 1 Samuel 22, verses 3 and 4. From there, that is from this cave, David went to Mizpah of Moab, where he said to the king of Moab, "Please let my father and mother stay with you until I know what God will do for me." And let me just simply point out that the connection here with Moab and the king of Moab is that Ruth, remember her, Ruth the Moabitess, was David's great-grandmother. There was a family connection. And I'm sure David reviewed that story because they're both obviously beyond this chronologically in generations. And so he said, "Please let my father and mother stay with you until I know what God will do for me." In other words, he's not sure of what lies ahead, but he's trusting God now. He's refocused. And so we read, he left them in the care of the king of Moab. He knew that they were in danger too. If Saul found out what they had done, how they'd come, Saul was at this point delusional. He was angry. He would take anybody out if he'd take out his own son. So David was concerned for his own family. So they stayed with him the whole time David was in the stronghold. You see, David was very, very much aware of God's law as it related to parents, because in Exodus 20:12, this is what God said through the law that he gave to Moses and the children of Israel. "Honor your father and your mother so that you may have a long life in the land the Lord your God is giving you." Now, Jesus picked up on this same theme, and we read about it in Matthew when he confronted the Pharisees, who were not practicing this law. In fact, they were practicing their own traditions and ignoring the law. So keep that in mind as we read this passage. He answered them, that is the Pharisees, "And why do you break God's commandment because of your tradition? For God said, 'Honor your father and your mother, and the one who speaks evil of father and mother must be put to death.'" And if you go back into the New Testament, if you go back into the Old Testament, you will actually see that this evil here is a curse. And in other words, these are adult people, children, who are cursing their parents and being very evil in their actions. And so God says, that's out of my will. And so Jesus reminds the Pharisees of their behavior. Now, what was the problem? Well, we go on in verses 5 and 6. "But you say, whoever tells his father or mother, 'Whatever benefits you might have received from me is a gift,' that is, it's committed to the temple, he does not have to honor his father. In this way, you have revoked God's word because of your tradition." Basically, what they had done, even though their parents were in deep need financially, they were in deep need as far as their health was concerned, these Pharisees said, "Look, I'm going to devote my money to the temple," in essence to God. Another word that is used there is korban in one translation. "I'm going to devote this to the temple. And in essence, because I've devoted it to God, I can keep it for myself. I'm no longer obligated to my parents." And Jesus put his finger on it and said, that is hypocritical. That is a violation of God's law, of honoring your parents. And so he said in Matthew 15, "Hypocrites, Isaiah prophesied correctly about you when he said, 'These people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. They worship me in vain, teaching as doctrines the commands of men.'" And so Jesus really took very seriously this concept of honoring parents, of caring for parents. Now, this leads to a very practical question. How can we truly honor our fathers and mothers when our parents may be irresponsible, controlling, insensitive, or even selfish? Have you ever faced that problem? I faced this problem as a pastor trying to advise people who take very seriously what we read in Ephesians 6, which is a reiteration of what we see here in the Old Testament, what Jesus said. Children, obey your parents as you would the Lord. And there the word children can refer to adult children who are already married, have children of their own. The word children is a very broad concept in the Greek text. Children, obey your parents as you would the Lord, because this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may have a long life in the land. In other words, he's going back to this Old Testament passage and stating that God takes us very seriously, and we should take it very seriously. But what if you have parents who are incredibly controlling? What if you have a mother-in-law, for example, who is meddling in a marriage, controlling, manipulating, and let's say the husband, her son, is kowtowing to this and allowing himself to be manipulated by his mother? What's that going to do to the wife? Have you ever faced that problem? I have, as a pastor. And well, number one is he has not left father and mother. Because that's not a geographical statement. That's an emotional statement. He's still being controlled by his mother. And so here is a mother who's trying to interfere, who doesn't think that the wife is worthy of her son, even into the marriage, and continues to manipulate and control. Well, what can happen there? It can destroy the marriage. I've seen marriages disintegrate because of controlling, manipulative parents. How are you going to honor that mother? Well, first of all, the son shouldn't let her manipulate. That's wrong. That's a violation of the will of God. That is not love. That's not honoring her. That's allowing her to do things she shouldn't do. Now, how you handle that is another issue, because it has to be handled sensitively. It has to be handled in a loving way. It may have to be handled through a second party or a third party. Someone else you trust, somebody else who will step in, who will help to deal with that situation. The fact is, though, even though there is a problem with this illustration, we still need to honor father and mother. And on some instances, I have said, you honor them, but you honor them at a distance. You don't allow them to interfere and take control and violate the will of God in your relationships. Now, I've just used one illustration. This could go the other way with a wife who's being controlled, and various different dynamics. Or you simply may have a husband and wife who won't let it happen, but they don't know how to honor and to keep it from happening, and they need wisdom and guidance on how to keep it from happening, and still honor father and mother and have the right attitude. And that takes a lot of wisdom. But with God's grace and God's help, and with love, but sometimes tough love, we're able to resolve issues like that. It takes God's wisdom. It takes help from perhaps a good counselor, perhaps a pastor, someone who can help us to work through these issues. But the principle still stands. Adult children are to honor and care for their parents. How we practice that at times takes a lot of wisdom and a lot of grace.